Thank you, robot lady. All right. Welcome everyone to a VC Lunch and Learn event. My name is Kirk. I will be your presenter, your host, your guide, your, insert appropriate title here. Today is got a pretty cool like North Star. It's like, hey, I would like to have an open source project on GitHub. I want other people to work on it. What does that actually entail? And how difficult is it? Is there anything I should consider? The short answer is it's not that difficult. GitHub, surprise, surprise, really wants people to do this. So they've set up a lot of good tools to kind of get into it. And we're just gonna look at the walkthrough. If I'm feeling bold, this might be sort of the project we use as an example for this will be my actual project that I have up for Hacktoberfest. So that could be cool. That would also mean that I would be forced to do said project. So here's the peer pressure. Okay, so yeah, so I mean, this is pretty loose format. Questions throughout are perfectly appropriate. Just raise your hand or ask it out. We can totally jump into it. And if at any point I say something that is strange or confusing or befuddling, just let me know and we can totally dive into it. Anticipated amount of time, I don't know if we'll take up the entire hour, but we have the entire hour, I think. I want to let folks go before the monthly challenge meeting okay, let's see if I can share my screen and we can jump into this. Let's go right here. Check out the chat. Giovanni asks, where is the recording shared? So the recording is eventually going to make it to our YouTube account. Allow a little time for that. Our AV team needs to sort of make sure that everything's there and do some setup. As soon as it's up, we will totally let you know. And let's hide some of this stuff. Okay, I probably won't be able to see the chat while I'm speaking, so feel free to just like say stuff out. All right, so we're here. You're on GitHub, and basically like I would like to do an open source project. Let's look at the creating the repo from scratch version. So this will be a tool for folks who may have never made their own like GitHub repo from scratch. You get a quick crash course in that, but we're just gonna like focus on the things that are necessary for an open source project. So we're gonna hit new, GitHub's gonna do its thing. Hopefully my computer plays nicely. So we spin everything up. There we go. Okay, so template repositories are something we're not really gonna cover here today, but if you find yourself doing a similar type of project all the time, that could be something to look into. Repository name. The repo name isn't super critical, but like, I mean, I would argue that like a good README and a good description are like the key things, but it doesn't hurt to have like a solid, memorable name that people can remember, can find the project by. My project for Hacktoberfest is going to be a sort of like simple implementation of Catan, but done using Elm and a bunch of like neat functional programming techniques and a nice little server for people to spin up. So let's call this Elm. Elm VC Catan. GitHub will tell you immediately if it's not available. This says description optional. I would say descriptions are not optional. So for the first thing, like the description is how people know what it is that you're doing. This name is not enough context. So, feel free to like add a meaningful one. If you don't do it now, you can always add it later. But key things I always want to say is like, well, what the thing is, like this this is an example replica of the board game Catan, implemented in, and you just, I mean, the main thing here is like, you want to give folks context of like, what is the scope of this project? Like, what are you actually trying to accomplish? So let's see, implemented in Elm with a, let's call it non-persistent session backend. So, you know, someone can look at this and like, they get to make the decision, like, is this something I'm interested in or not? Does this touch the parts of the stack that I want to or not? You don't want to go overboard in the description. You can add lots of detail in the README. Just a quick glance, I think that's good. Public and private, obviously, if you're going open source, it's public. Initialize with a README file always. Do you want to git ignore? I typically go for yes. The cool thing that GitHub does now is they offer git ignore templates. So if you know the major language that your project's going to be in, you can just pick from the dropdown. Will it be perfect? Maybe not. You might still have to adjust it later, but at least it puts it there and you know about it from the get-go. I feel like that's pretty good. Choose a license. Okay, so we can spend a little bit of time here. I know one of the things that people get usually confused about and have a lot of questions about is open source licenses. And there's like a couple of things I want to cover. First one being, if you are planning on having other people work on your project, you should have a license. A lot of people think like, well, if it's on GitHub, that means it's open source. And that's not true. The agreement that GitHub has is we will host your code and you must allow, like if it's on a public repo, other people, anyone is allowed to look at it. It says nothing about working on it. It says nothing about like forking, like all these things are not baked into that. All right, it is very possible for someone to have code on GitHub and like, you can't like take it and Colin, what's up?
So it lets you fork it, even if it lets someone fork it, even if your desire is that they don't, right?
As far as I understand it, if it's a public repo,
Yeah.
then anyone has the ability to look at and download that code.
So we could say it's technically illegal to fork it, but the software lets anyone who wants to fork it.
Well, I would say it's illegal, but like it's not like GitHub's not part of the GitHub contract. Like someone can't take your code and like use it or repackage it and then say like, oh, well, GitHub said it was okay. That's not part of the GitHub agreement, you know?
Right.
GitHub, if you put it on GitHub, you can look at it, you can download it if you want, you know, but like that's as much as you're getting and that's as much as is covered. So that's why if you want other people to work on it, it's just always good to have an explicit license. And yeah, so one of the things about that is there's a lot of licenses to choose from. And there's a couple resources. There's a website I think called like Find an Open Source License that will give you a breakdown. Generally, I tend to sort them into 3, or in fact 2. If you're working on a project and you don't care what people do with it at all, like you're just like, you can copy it, you can package it, you can put it in something you sell, I don't care. That's going to be your MIT license. It is sort of as permissive as you can get. But that's the point. If you use an MIT license, later on, if you find out someone's taken your code and they've put a wrap around it, they made a service and they're the next Uber, there's nothing you can do, you know? And that's okay. And this is many of the tools and frameworks that we use are MIT licensed. That's fine, you know? But it's just something to be aware of for your own personal project. One I tend to use a lot is the BSD3. And I should also make a point to say, like, I'm not a lawyer. The details of these and the exact wordings, that's not my forte as a developer. I have an overview of what they mean and how they work, and I know a couple in my tool belt. So BSD3 is the one that I tend to like. It says, hey, this is open source, it's free to use, it's free to modify, but like don't use it for commercial purposes. Most of the stuff I use is under there. And that's also like a double protection, I feel like, for me and for anyone else working on my things. For example, Catan is a real thing owned by a real company. So whatever I do with it, I'm always careful to put like, this is an example, this is a replica, and the license for this project explicitly like disallows people from, you know, attempting to like use this work for profit. Is all of that necessary? Maybe not. I don't think the folks at Catan particularly care if I write some code about it, but it's good to have your bases covered. And you want that protection, if not for yourself, but for the people contributing to your project. And I think that's one of the key things. The licenses protect the contributors and make sure that like they don't get in trouble. So generally for projects, I use MIT or BSD3. GNU General Public License is also fairly common. And there's a few others there, you know. I think the unlicensed is one of those, like, I don't really care what you do, whatever you want. But yeah, so for this one, let's go with BSD3. Main is a default branch, that's fine. We don't need any of these external apps right now. We're just creating the project. We're just gonna hit create repository. And if we didn't do anything weird, we should have that going. But it's really good that then I'll let you just, hey, by default, you get a readme, you get a git ignore, get a license. Honestly, you know, like you're halfway there. But let's see like what it actually throws up, and then we will make some modifications. Cool. So there's that handy dandy about. Note that once we pick the license, it will show up here and people can always look that up. The readmes here, we can show that up. What I want to do now is actually tweak this description. If you have an associated website for your project, you can throw it here. But what first thing I want to jump into is topics. I think topics are pretty important if you want people to find your work. When you use searches in GitHub, it will check the topic as well. Helps you show up, especially if you're like, if it's not just, if you're looking for contributors who are more than just people you know, people you can send the link, that is pretty valuable. And here is where I get like very, almost like, yeah, I mean, granular of keyword. So obviously I want to say the language. This is front end and back end. So I would say front end. And it gives you suggestions, which is great. So front end, I would say back end, I would say game development. Is there anything else that I think is like really necessary here? Maybe functional programming. Maybe someone doesn't know about it. We can put that in functional programming. And I mean, you feel free to play around here, but you want to like put in the relevant keywords to your project so people can find it. Also, GitHub knows like who is suggested to, because they now do suggested projects in GitHub, and it takes a look at what people are into, what they've been searching for, and it tends to throw stuff up. So I would think that's good. And save the changes. Cool. Might come back later and flesh out that description a little bit more, but it's not like a huge deal right now. There we go. Cool. This is what I like to see. And when I'm looking for projects, the first thing I check out is their about, and I look at the tags, and like that should be enough for me to go like, oh, okay, I want to know more about this, or not my bag. Looks cool, but I'm gonna kind of like not hang out here. Okay, so next place we're gonna go is, if I remember correctly, incense. And I'm going to show you my favorite feature in GitHub, which is if you go to community. GitHub tells you exactly what it considers to be the minimum for a good OSS project, or the minimum amount of files that it would like you to have. So do you have a proper description? Do you have a README? Do you have a code of conduct? Do you have a contributing.md? Do you have a license? Do you have issue templates? And do you have pull request templates? So these 7 things, and GitHub's like, think you're ready to go. And, from at least a VC perspective, our standard is also pretty much this, except we go a step further with like suggestions for what these files should have, which GitHub really doesn't do. Just like you should have one, but you could have a README file of a single word, and GitHub's like, great job, even though that's not actually beneficial for everyone. But this is still good, and it gives you like a nice metric of what's still left to be accomplished. So let's check out code of conduct, contributing, and templates. We'll circle back to the README. That can be cool. Okay, so let's look at code of conduct. I need to move the screen a bit. I also love that you can just add them from here, and they have like very extensive documentation on this. So this regular community standards takes you to an entire GitHub article section that goes over what each of these are, what do they do, what's a good version of it. So there's a lot, they put in a lot of thought into like making it easy so that you can make it easy for other people to work on stuff that you do. So I appreciate that. But yeah, let's jump into the code of conduct. Anyone who's been at VC for a while, we talk about our code of conduct a lot. We really like it. We spend a lot of time on it. There are lots of developers who say like, well, I don't know if I need a code of conduct. I don't expect people to cause any problems. But I would say like, that's not necessarily the goal of the code of conduct. It's not like, regardless of whether or not you think people will like display bad behaviors, the code of conduct is just a declaration of intent of the type of space you're trying to achieve. And the fun fact is like, what determines whether or not I stay in a space is not the tech stack. It's the community and the community interactions. You could have the coolest project in the world. If I feel like every time I try and make a contribution, I'm disrespected or belittled, or I just don't feel good in this environment, I'm not going to contribute anything. And the code of conduct gives you sort of like a reference guide for things that happen, and you get to go like, is this okay? Well, what does our COC say? What did we say was like cool or not cool? It gives clear guidelines for how to escalate things. It gives clear guidelines for, what is the series of steps that need to be taken if your project expands and you get more people on the team, and they're like, well, how do we deal with these things? Like it covers a lot of ground, and it's good to have. They give 2 examples here. There's the contributor covenant, and there's a citizen code of conduct. I don't expect this to be sort of a large community event one, so we can go contributors covenant. Is it okay to use code of conduct templates? Absolutely. They're good. People have spent a lot of time on that. The only thing I would say is like, whichever one you pick, you should read it first. Like read it first, see if it actually agrees with what you think. You never want to be like surprised by your COC when it comes up. But yeah, feel free to look around, see the popular ones. You can pick one of those. And also feel free to like, once you've added it to your project, it's yours to tweak as you see fit. Like technically all the code of conduct are themselves like open source and like freely modifiable. So if you want to add more details, go for it. And like over time, code of conducts tend to be like the software itself, living documents. They evolve as you hit edge cases and different scenarios. So, really like feel free to make it your own. But I tend to like a good COC. To adopt this, enter your details. You have a chance to review, blah, 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 blah. So just going to add my email address here. I actually never done it through this interface before, so I don't know if this is exactly what it's looking for, but that's okay. Yeah, there we go. All looks good. All right, this is exciting. Well, it's exciting. Yeah, so before you actually, cool thing about GitHub, before you actually add any of these files, you always have a chance to edit, make commits. So you have one last chance to take a look at it. This name is standard, and this name is how GitHub detects that your code of conduct exists. So I would not modify this, and I would leave it in the top level folder of your project. Create code of conduct, regular commit. Don't tell anyone. I'm not going to make any branch and pull requests for this because we don't want to. So we're going to commit that. That should go to the project. And that's our first additional doc in place. Yeah, so code of conducts are cool. You will find open source projects out in the wild that don't have them. All this stuff where they're suggesting and giving you examples is fairly new. A lot of folks started their repos long before this was a thing and people even knew it was a thing. And that's okay, you know, but I would say every new project at this point should have a code of conduct. So let's go back to our community tab. And if we did that right, boom, got our tick. I don't know if it's just like weird conditioning from primary school, but every time I see a green tick, it's just like a instant dopamine release in my brain. You know, I would do anything for peace. Anything. All right. Contributing.md. This contributing.md gets a little bit more nuanced. So we're sort of scaling up the complexity for these files. In the sense that a COC, you find a good one, you can paste it in. You don't get suggestions for contributing.md. And that's because this is the document that tells people how to actually, you know, interact with the repo. And that's very personal for different projects. Everyone kind of has their own way. React has their own way for contributing, you know, like Microsoft's projects have their own way for contributing, and like down to a team level. Some projects don't use any issues. You know, they're just like, here's the pull request guide, submit a pull. Some projects, everything has to start with an issue, you know, even if it's like a very obvious bug or an obvious fix. Some go through a triage period. Some, there's a lot going on there. All of this can and should be covered in your contributing.md. And I would say my general strategy is start simple and then flesh it out. Key things I think should be in the contributing.md from the get-go is how to install my project. If I can't install your project, I can't help you. And I'm not gonna like spend energy to figure it out. That's not my job as a contributor. So number one, you can put it here. You can, some people just stick it straight in the README, how to install my project. Personally, I feel like no one's ever gonna complain you're too detailed on this. You know, some people do it very high level. It's all, you know, clone down, npm install, you're good to go. Some people get into the nitty gritties column.
Yeah. So I'd say arguably that should go in the README, and then you don't want to necessarily have it twice. Maybe you might say how to install C README, something like that.
Well, I think I'd probably do the in the README. I would say how to install C contributing, because most people people will like land on the README 99% of the time. So if you want to use the README as like this here and it's the director, I think that's totally cool.
Okay. The main point is just have it once and refer. Yeah.
Yeah, or sometimes people do like a high level one in the README, you know, yarn install, blah, blah, blah. And like for details, C contributing, and then contributing is where they really do like the rabbit hole. I think that's fine. But yeah, you know, keep it in one place and just make sure from the from the landing page of your repo, they can easily get to that place. So I think that's good. But yes, how to install, how to install, how to install, how to install. And especially with new people on your project, you know, this is going to be where they hit roadblocks. I think like it's like an 80-20 thing. 80% of the issues when people get started is like, oh, I couldn't get it to install. Because everyone's like, oh, they might have a different version of NPM. They might be using Yarn, you know, like depending on the complexity of your project, there's like homebrew shenanigans. All of this, as they come up, put it in your contributing. Just, you know, but contributing tends to become like just like a log of issues folks could have in the process of trying to work on this. And I think that's great. But with bare minimum, how to install. Next, you want to go, we'll look at like a living example after this, but I just want to like put some notes here. How to contribute, or like how to find something to work on. And this tells people, hey, you know, so you should check out the issues. You should look at the appropriate tags, which are the tags to look out for. Once you've found an issue, how do you claim that issue? How do you request to work on that issue? You know, once you've got a pull, you know, or some change you want to make, how do you get that back into the code base? I think this is the things you want to cover here. There's a couple of things that I personally like, and I think we added this to the virtual coffee checklist. You know, how to reach the maintainer and what's the cycle for feedback. And I feel like that's a big thing that's rarely covered in open source repos, but like you own this project and you know how often you want to work on this or interact with this. Whatever you decide is fine, but you should let people know, hey, I only work on this once a week. So if you submit a PR, you know, don't expect a response today, which is a subtle way of saying, don't bug me because I didn't respond to your PR immediately or your issue immediately. You know, expect a 24-hour cycle, expect a 1 week cycle. You can even say expect a 1 month cycle. You know, like it's all fine as long as you're upfront about it and people have a chance to go, okay, they can still do their work and you get to it whenever you get to it. I think that's fine. So how to reach the maintainer and response cycles, I think those are excellent things to have in your contributing. The last thing you tend to usually see are things like style guides. So some readmes, depending on how their system is set up, they might have some automation that say, hey, make sure your PR has X and Y name. Make sure your PR includes the number of the issue that it's addressing. These little details. I would say this is also a space where you don't have to get too detailed, but I would say arrange it in order of importance. Start with install, start with the issue and PR process, and then at the end, you can start putting those like, this is the, you know, other things like this is the linter that we use, you know, there's a config for our prettier settings. Like make sure you put, you know, like it's just, this program is very particular. We have a lot of opinions. It's okay to have opinions. And it's okay to say, hey, if you're working on a project that I'm working on, this is a style that I like. And some people might be like, I don't want to use that style. And it's like, that's okay. You may not work on this project. It's okay. But just make it clear in the contributing. It helps when people submit stuff. You can always reference back to it. Oh, hey, actually, we don't usually do that this way here. Check out the contributing for more details on like how to style it. That just solves a lot of problems. Now, I should have a sample one up. This is from Adam, everyone's favorite text editor. By everyone, I mean, I don't know, like 5 people nowadays. It's still good. So they've got a pretty sizable one. Now they've made a table of contents, although GitHub now will automatically generate a TOC from the markdown. So you don't really need to make an explicit table of contents anymore, which is great because since they don't have like markdown support for an explicit TOC, so it's kind of a pain. So this is awesome. So yeah, so they're like, hey, I don't want to read this thing. I just have a question. They keep a fact, which is pretty cool. What should I know before I get started? How can I contribute? How do I report bugs? If it's your first time, what do you do? Style guides, additional notes. So this looks like a pretty awesome README. Usually these are not meant to be consumed in their entirety. You find the appropriate section for you, you jump in there, but you know, it's designed to be a real working guide for folks. And as much as you can make it clear, especially this part, I think that's great. You know, tell people the way you want to be supported on your project explicitly, and they will do that. If you don't tell them, then they will guess, and those guesses might be wrong, and then both sides get frustrated. So I'm a big fan of the nice contributing. But yeah, it's one of those things. It's very hard to make a template for contributing because you've got to tweak it so much anyway. So I will opt for not putting a bunch of details in my contributing. That's actually going to take me some time. Not forever, but like I would say like 30 minutes of like dedicated time. And well, we don't want to spend 30 minutes watching me type text into an editor. So we'll leave this up for now. And then at some point in the near future, I will get this all in. But you know, hopefully that part at least kind of makes sense. I've been talking for a while without stop, so I'm going to take a pause. If anyone has any questions, comments, feel free to shout some stuff out. I'll hit this commit button. Okay, I can't help myself. Note that for every file we do here, GitHub will always ask you, like, do you want to commit or open up a PR? So you always have a nice record of what's going on, which I think is good. Okay. Matt says, seems like Creative Commons is very permissive too. That is true. I don't think I've ever used that one, but it's, I feel like Creative Commons is used more for assets, images, like things that are sort of like in a state that's already meant to be shared and not necessarily looking for contributions. There's some wiggle room there, but what I've found is if it's software, then they tend to opt for MIT. But if it's a repo that just contains like templates, images, or resources, or something else, they might go for Creative Commons. Cool. All right, so we're going to jump back to community. No, you don't have to do everything from here. If you just add these files in the right name, GitHub understands. We're just going back to here because it's a valuable reference point, and you know, it just lets us see how far we've gotten. Dan, that's there's a lot of red in that background. It's okay. Cool. All right, so we've got our description, our README, code of conduct, contributing license. We're looking pretty good so far. The last two things are issue templates and pull request templates from the GitHub perspective. And they're both similar enough that we're kind of going to cover them at the same time. Essentially, instead of people having a blank slate for when they go to submit one of these, you can use Markdown to basically provide a guide. You know, it sections it out and tells them, hey, this is what I'm looking for. This is what this project expects for these documents, and then they can fill it in appropriately. This is pretty valuable. And I think the best example of that is if someone's submitting an issue for something like a bug. You know, as we all know, solving bugs is hard, and like debugging things is difficult, and you want as much context as possible. You may be surprised to know that without prompting, people don't give you the amount of context you need to solve their problems sometimes. So having like a issue template that explicitly, hey, I need to, you know, what machine are you running on? briefly describe the problem, steps to reproduce, all these questions that you were going to ask anyway, you can put that in a template so the person sees that from the get-go and they can immediately, so it lets you front load a lot of the discussion. So by the time you actually start a correspondence, we are already in solving the problem. Like we've solved half of the problem, which feels pretty awesome. So let's see where this button takes us. It didn't take us. Okay, I knew it was going to do it. If it did it right, we should see a very special folder here. As soon as my computer stops doing so, I give out everything. And then close the chat again. There we go. Add template gives us some options. Let's see what we have. Bug report, feature requests, or you can go custom. And I would say, if you don't want to take the time to kind of like write these out explicitly, having at least a bug report and a feature request template gets you a lot of mileage. I do think it's valuable to have one for general questions. And I do think it's valuable to, I was like, have one for like a few other things, but these two are okay. So let's start with the bug report one, see what happens. Preview and edit. Yes, please. So this is just a markdown file, like most of the things on GitHub, and it's like, hey, describe the bug, how to reproduce it, what's the expected behavior. You can drop some screenshots. GitHub lets you just drag and drop images, and that'll totally work, so that's great. And desktop, smartphone, additional context. This is awesome, right? And if like I'm coming to a project and I am trying to like tell them something's wrong, I'm super happy to see something like this. It tells me exactly what I need to say to get my suggestion taken seriously. And I think like templates do add like a little bit of credibility when you're interacting with something. Also, if you're dealing with people who it's their first time contributing, this is a great teaching tool. It lets them know what's relevant and what's important. They feel like, okay, I think I'm definitely doing the right thing. I followed the template. It just covers a lot of boxes. A lot of these documents are just like, they're just a vibe check, just like this. I am more clear that I am doing the right thing because someone has said what the right thing is and I can follow those instructions. Without contributings, without COCs, without templates, people are just kind of floating in the air and you end up spending a lot more time going, actually, that's not quite the way. It's a lot. So I think this looks perfectly good. We can hit propose changes. And we got our handy dandy commit message. And we're going to hit commit on that. I want to show the feature one afterwards for a little bit, but let's just see if we can get the bug one in. And cool. Okay, so this is the main thing I wanted to show. GitHub puts these in a special folder called .github. Some of you might have not encountered this before. A few things go in this folder, especially if you're using things like GitHub Actions, which we're not really covering today. But just note that if you're making an issue template from scratch, you do need to put it in this. You need to like make a .github folder and put it in that folder. It should not be in your regular top folder. This is where GitHub will look for things like this and find them and use them in your project. Now, if that worked, we should be able to go to issues. Have an issue, here's its issue. And we hit new issue. Moment of truth. Dum dum dum. Hey, and our bug report is now here. Folks can click it to get started. If you click it, it takes you to that markdown file exactly as we saw it. And now they can now modify this and submit the report, which is awesome. So templates are great. I would say if you're not a huge project, don't go overboard with it. I think having 3 or 4 of these is good. More than that, people tend to get like there's analysis paralysis and they're just like, what's the right one? Although I think like for private, like internal projects, some people do have like a very elaborate thing, but that's different. So have bugs, have features, have maybe like a general question / help one. I think you're good to go. Did I have any other examples of those? This is what I have for one of my other open source projects. So it's basically 4 templates: the feature request, a bug, questions, and updates to documentation. And I've been good with that for a while. I haven't really had a reason to add any more. That's been awesome. While we're here, let's do a quick look at a pull request template. These can also be sort of like as involved as issues. I mean, you can kind of make these what you want. But generally for pull requests, you want to tell folks like, hey, if there's a linked issue, you want to add it. Add a description of the solution associated with the code, so there's more context than just reading the code. If there's any supporting documentation, add that in there. Some people have checks for like, are there unit tests associated with this? Were the tests run? Were there any manual tests or integration tests done? You can get as detailed as you want. I would say if it's an open source project with general contributors, again, you don't want to like overwhelm people. I think what's the linked issue? What's the description of the solution? Leave this sort of open for them to add what they think is necessary. That's a good start. And as the project maybe gets more complex, this might change, but I think that's pretty good. Normally, you only need one pull request template unless the project is like nuanced enough that there's like very explicit differences between contributing to this part of the project or this part. But I don't know if I've ever seen that, even in like professional organizations. It's usually just like there's one way. You can also put a lot of context here. I know with the virtual coffee one, I think our pull request like links back to our contributing, like both our issues and our pull request templates link back to the contributing guide. So if people like somehow manage to miss contributing and they jump right in here, it still lets them go back. That can be great. I feel like a lot of what I'm saying is, go for it, man. But it really is like, it's your project. So like, you should be like, what do I want? I think on the podcast, we sort of described open source projects. It's like you're making your own little community, even if that community starts off as just you, but like it grows over time, so it's like, what do I want my community to be like? It's almost like, in a way, it's a little bit like running your own software dev team. So it's a good space to kind of practice, well, what would I be like in a leadership role? Or what type of leadership do I like? And like, how do I make that for my project? I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so I'm just gonna copy this for now. And then we're gonna go back to one of these tabs. I have so many. We're not actually gonna file an issue right now. And we'll go back to community. See, they don't let you just add one off the bat because GitHub's like, you're fine, man. You do this. I've helped you enough. So we can just go to the code. Ooh, that's way too slow. Yeah, we'll just go to that folder and we'll just like manually make a file ourselves. Oh, that's not what I want. Let's go here. And let's add a file, create a file. We're gonna call this pull_request_template.md. I don't know if the caps lock matters. It might be that every single person I've ever seen has just used all caps because we've all seen someone else use all caps, like a real emperor's new clothes type situation, but it's fine. And we can do that, and we're going to create this, and we're going to commit. And if I did that right, then we should be good to go. And yeah, I mean, in terms of the files you need for open source, this is pretty much it, you know, from as far as GitHub is concerned, and for most projects. If I see all these things, I'm like, this is good to go. This person's like ready to kind of jump into this. Let's go to insights. If I don't get all the check marks, I will literally cry. So, yes. Sweet. Yeah, so this is good. And GitHub's got a lot of integrations. It will show these to people. It will let people coming in know, like, hey, here's a code of conduct for this project. Here's a contributing guide for this project. Check out the issue templates when you make a new issue. It'll suggest them. You know, if you want to look at the license, they can look it up. So these integrations are built in to GitHub. So as long as you have these, it knows what to do with them. It's very cool. I think that's great. Now, the README. Right now, our README doesn't really say anything. So let's go back and see, like, well, what's the typical type of thing you have on the README? And actually, I'm going to jump to an example, which shamelessly is going to be my own project. Because this is the project I worked on for last Hacktoberfest. A lot of the stuff that you're hearing about now, like, we sort of refined during that time. So I think if you're ever like wondering what these look like and you want an example of some live projects, the virtual coffee site itself, I think, is an excellent example of what a sort of like working OSS repo looks like. And mine is also not too bad. So let's kind of jump down here and we'll go through what are the things you see. README. For many projects, I'll briefly go over this. You'll see these kind of tags here. These are not critical. They are sort of like quick ways to give some info about the project. People sort of will tag the stack, open issues, contributors. There's a Hacktoberfest integration one. But this is not necessary. And I would say, like, this is like one of the last things you do after you've gotten everything all set up. So let's kind of jump into the README. What is the project? So we had like a brief description and description. If you want to get into more details, this is the place to do it. Ignore this silliness by me. It does, you know, like, just give people like a proper rundown of like what are the project's goals and what you're trying to accomplish. Some people do a roadmap, which lets people know, like, well, what's on the docket and what's planned, especially if it's like a long-term project. You can use, well, we'll jump into that. Run and install. So Colin had asked about that earlier. Here in the README, I think most people just put like the basics for installing, for running and installing here. You want people to see that sooner rather than later, because that's usually what they want to get involved in. And yeah, a more in-depth guide can be found in contributing, and we have a link to our contributing. I don't have anything for tests yet. We make a brief mention of the code of conduct and a link to the code of conduct. I make a little note for Hacktoberfest. You don't have to do this, but if you're sort of like planning on opening out on Hacktoberfest, giving some context for what that is when people look at your repo might be good. Describing the tech stack. I would say that's a good idea. Let people know, because usually people like want to work on specific things. So you're like, hey, this project uses JavaScript, it uses Node, it uses Apollo, it uses 11D. And having that here can help people make a decision on whether or not they want to work on it, whether they feel confident to work on it. I think it's a good idea. I have a little bit of an FAQ. As the project goes on, if you hear any common questions, especially if you're doing something slightly differently than other people, or you're doing a different take on a certain thing, feel free to throw them in the README. The README is like the first thing that people hit when they show up to your project. So, it's fine to like front load the ideas here. Other things that I like, some contact info never hurts. Who the author of the project is. This is a chance, you might want to link back to like your main GitHub or your website, or, that's perfectly fine. I make a note of my contributors. This works when the project is small. As it grows, it might be more difficult, and there's ways to like get an automated list of contributors, but that's not super necessary. Finally, our license, and that's kind of the standard. But I would say, how to install or a link to it to your contributing. What is the project, and link to any websites or external sites that have examples of the project. What's the tech stack is super important, and contact info. I think those are the basics for a good README. And just to say, people definitely pay attention to the README, and I think when I'm looking at libraries, if I go to a project and the README is just bare, I'm probably not inclined to work on it. I might still use it if it's a library that I want to kind of get into, but it's like, I don't know, there's a certain amount of trust that people will have that their contributions will be taken seriously if they see like just a decent read. So I would say just take the time to put the necessary info. It doesn't have to be especially pretty or fancy, but just taking the time to tell people, hey, here's how to work on this, and like here's what we're doing, lets people know, oh, they really do want people to contribute here. And I think that is cool. Okay, so it is apparently 12:59, and that is terrifying because my brain says I've only been here for 10 minutes. But I'm going to take a quick pause here and say that is the basics of it. I would say I don't think it's very scary, and there's no perfect here. And there's also no like, I've ruined this forever here. Everything we've just seen is editable, it's adjustable, and the versions you see of READMEs in projects that you really like took very many dozens of iterations from people starting with the basics, and they got more involved and they added more details, contributors added details, and it really like can grow into something that is helpful for people and a great place for them to share. Yeah. Do we have any questions or right now? Oh, I can't see the chat. Dan said, oh yeah, you can't actually add more than one PR template. It's a GitHub limitation. Oh, it's trying to hold us down. I don't like it. The issues beta. Yeah. So the new thing that GitHub is trying is an issues beta where you can embed entire forms in issues. Virtual Coffee is trying that. So if you do any of our issues for Hacktoberfest, then you will get to test those out. But the markdown version of the template is here for everyone. So you can always do that. Jennifer, yeah, no problem. We will have this up and available. Anyone can watch it at any time and go for it. I know maybe not everyone here will want to make their own project, and that's okay. I think this is also valuable if you just want to contribute, just to get a rundown on maybe what the maintainers care about and maybe what you should be looking out for. So, hey, I'm not sure about what to do in this project. Check out the templates. Check out the contributing guide. Hey, I don't know how interactions work here. Check out the code of conduct. Hey, I'm not sure if I have the right interaction. Check out the code of conduct, right? Like, so it's a good where to go to find what info. I wanted to take a quick look at labels, only to say, well, we can get into it like super quick. Let's do a quick update. Just to say that GitHub comes with a standard set of labels. I don't know if I like them a lot. Hold on, let me close this chat. So for all your issues and all your pull requests, you can add labels. And they are like extra guides for folks. So labels in general are really helpful. So when anyone's working on, like when you have your actual issues up, you can say, hey, documentation, this is a bug, do you want help, et cetera, Good first issue is one of the specific labels. If you put good first issue, GitHub like highlights it. GitHub is sites that will let people know these are repos that have good first issues. And this like has a known meaning of good for first time contributors, good for people for Hacktoberfest. So just be aware of that. That's going to happen. There's also the Hacktoberfest tag itself. If you want your project to be part of Hacktoberfest, in the description tags, you should put it there. But also, if you accept a PR and you add Hacktoberfest as a tag, then it will also count for the Hacktoberfest contribution. So you can use that. I want to show a couple others because I think it's worth looking at. GitHub gives you those, but you can like make your own tags. And I actually think it's really valuable to like make tags that are meaningful for your project. Something that I do, and I think Virtual Coffee does, is we split our tags into sections. So, it's like, what is the type of the issue? What is the context for the issue? What is the status of the issue? So usually, as soon as someone says like, hey, I want to work on an issue, I swap the tag from like available to like taken. You can technically like see whether an issue has someone working on it if you click it, or it might have a little notification, but I just like this being like a very obvious way for people to know, oh, this is free, and you can add more context like, okay, this is a UI change, this is a refactor. So, feel free to like make these your own and kind of play around with it. But I think these are great. And also once you have them, people can sort by them on your issue board. That's great too. A couple things we didn't get into today. Discussions. If you want to like make your project more community oriented, you can have folks participate in discussions directly here in the repo. Projects gives you a way to have basically a Trello style, Kanban board style for organizing tasks. It can automatically sync up with issues and PRs. You don't have to do that for a project. Like neither of these is a have to do. Some people just enjoy it. The wiki is a space where you can add any documentation you might want if you want to have more comprehensive documentation. So it really is possible to run an entire project, I would say, completely on the GitHub platform. Not everyone does that, but the option is there. I think for my personal Hacktoberfest project, I'm going to take a look at having a setup like this, and just, you can have your project be sort of a little micro dome of a fully fledged software project, and you can have teams. You can kind of do it the way you like. But the goal today was to just show what's the minimum you need before you can just say, hey, come help me out on this. And I think getting those 7 dollars in and just making sure that the relevant content is in there, that is all you need. And I encourage everyone, if you have not made an open source project before, give it a shot, put some issues up. And I would love to help you make them and also contribute to them. Oh yeah, Dan brings up a point. There's always like, I don't know, they're like PR thieves, issue hunters. there'd be people like, hey, can I work on this good first issue? And then you check out their GitHub and they've got like hundreds of commits. I just do a polite sorry, but we're saving this for people who are truly new to the platform, et cetera, et cetera. And most people are fine with that. And it does bring up a good thing. This is your space. Like, it's still your project as the owner, like, so, no one has to do an issue. If someone submits a PR, you don't have to accept that PR. No one is entitled to sort of your time. And this is a thing that you put effort into, and I try and ward people away from letting their projects like stress them out, which is why I think it's good and you're contributing to like set the boundaries that you want. So maybe you check this project every day, but it might still be good to tell people, well, I usually respond to things every few days to give yourself that bandwidth so you don't have to, get agitated. If you need to take a break from the project, update your README and say like, hey, the maintainers of this project are in a hiatus for the next few months, just make it clear and just operate by the schedule and actions so that you do your best. Because for the most part, open source work is most people are not getting paid for it, and even if you are getting paid for it, like, this should not be stressful, and don't let like other people stress you out. So I would say that's important. Yeah, so if folks are like, hey, can I work on this issue, and it's not an issue for them, it's fine to say, I'm sorry, but we're saving this issue for someone else, for a different type of for a less experienced developer. Please feel free to check out some of these others, but you gotta like let people know how that is. Yeah, so all the virtual coffee approved projects, the maintainers sort of understand this implicitly, and when we say like, hey, this is a good first issue or good for newer developers, we actually mean it. And we try and be there for advice, for guidance, for assistance. Most of our stuff is targeted like, hey, you're new to this type of thing, let's try and make it as good for you as possible. Which I think in general, if you're a smaller project and you're trying to get people involved, having an attitude of help us help you as much as possible is a good place to go. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think if there's no more immediate questions, then I'm gonna stop sharing for now. And I just want to say to all the folks who came out, I appreciate you making time for this. Open source is something that I didn't really get into before last year with virtual coffee, but I kind of fell in love with it. It's one of my favorite things. Lets me pair up with people that I like and do work that I like. I think it's kind of important. Work isn't always fun, but open source is like my outlet for doing fun things that I like with people that I like. So yeah, we will have this recording up for folks later to check out. And if anybody has any questions at all, you know where to find me in the Slack. I am just a message away for sure. And yeah, thanks for coming, and see you all at Hacktoberfest.